Have you noticed how suddenly someone's energy around you has shifted, how conversations feel colder, how distance is forming without explanation? And what if I told you this isn't random at all? What if this is the exact moment God is stepping in to remove someone from your life before they can block what He's about to bless you with? So before you scroll away, understand this. What's happening right now could be divine protection in disguise. And by the end of this video you may realize that the separation you feared is actually the breakthrough you've been praying for. So stay with me, because this message might explain everything you've been feeling lately. Have you been feeling a strange shift lately, like something is changing behind the scenes, like certain conversations feel different, certain energies feel heavier, and certain people around you are not as aligned as they once seemed? Because what if I told you that this is not random, this is not coincidence, and this is not your imagination, this is preparation? And sometimes when God is about to elevate you, when He is about to answer prayers you have been whispering through tears, when He is about to unlock doors you have been knocking on in silence, He first removes what cannot go where you are going, and the removal is rarely comfortable, it is rarely predictable, and it often feels sudden. But heaven does not make emotional decisions, heaven makes strategic ones. And if God is about to remove someone from your life suddenly, it is not punishment, it is protection, it is not cruelty. It is correction, and it is not loss, it is alignment, because there are people who were assigned to a season of your life but not your destiny. There are people who walked with you when you were building but cannot walk with you when you begin to shine. There are people who celebrated you when you were small but secretly struggle with your growth. And when God sees conversations that drain you, connections that distract you, attachments that delay you, He will step in, not always with warning, not always with explanation, but always with purpose. And the hardest truth to accept is that sometimes the person God removes is someone you love deeply, someone you trusted fully, someone you imagined would be there forever. But forever is not a human decision, it is a divine one, and God sees what you do not see, He hears what you do not hear, He knows intentions that have not yet manifested into actions. And He will never allow hidden sabotage to sit at the same table as your breakthrough. So if lately you feel distance growing without reason, if communication is breaking down without clarity, if tension is rising without explanation, do not panic immediately, do not beg immediately, do not chase immediately. Because sometimes the very thing you are trying to hold together is the very thing God is trying to separate, and when He removes someone suddenly it can feel like the ground shifted under your feet, it can feel like betrayal, it can feel like abandonment, it can even make you question your own worth. But removal is not a reflection of your value, it is a reflection of divine timing. And timing is everything in the spiritual realm, because the wrong voice in the right season can sabotage your obedience, the wrong influence in the right opportunity can distort your judgment, and the wrong attachment in the middle of your transformation can pull you back into a version of yourself that God already delivered you from. And you must understand that not everyone who started with you is meant to finish with you, not everyone who prayed with you is meant to prosper with you, not everyone who supported your pain is meant to celebrate your power, and God does not remove randomly, He removes intentionally, He removes precisely, He removes when conversations in secret begin to contradict promises spoken in public. He removes when loyalty shifts quietly, He removes when hearts change silently, and sometimes the person being removed will not look evil, they will not look dangerous, they may even look innocent, but misalignment does not always look like wickedness. Sometimes it simply looks like incompatibility with your next level, and growth creates separation naturally, elevation creates exposure automatically, and the higher you rise, the more clearly you see who was walking with you for love and who was walking with you for convenience. And here is the part most people struggle with: you may not get closure, you may not get an apology, you may not get an explanation that satisfies your heart, because divine removal does not require human understanding. And if God had to explain every detail of why someone cannot continue in your life, you would be overwhelmed by the truth, you would be hurt by what was hidden, you would be shocked by what was planned. So sometimes He simply creates distance, sometimes He allows conflict, sometimes He allows misunderstanding, sometimes He closes the door abruptly, and you call it sudden, but heaven calls it mercy. Because what feels like a loss today may have been a disaster tomorrow. What feels like heartbreak today may have been humiliation later. What feels like confusion today may have been betrayal in the future. And God is not obligated to let you experience pain just so you can understand His protection. Sometimes protection comes in the form of separation, sometimes peace comes through removal, and sometimes your next breakthrough requires an empty seat at your table. And if you are honest with yourself, there were signs, small signs, subtle signs, moments where your spirit felt uneasy, moments where something did not sit right, moments where you felt drained instead of uplifted, but you ignored it because you cared, you ignored it because you were loyal, you ignored it because you did not want to start over. But growth demands courage, and courage sometimes means accepting that who you love may not be who you need, and who you need may not be who you are used to. And when God begins to shift your circle, it is because your capacity is expanding, your vision is expanding, your calling is expanding, and certain mindsets cannot expand with you, certain energies cannot elevate with you, certain habits cannot survive where discipline is required, and so the removal happens, sometimes overnight, sometimes through one argument that feels bigger than it should, sometimes through a revelation that changes everything instantly. And you sit there wondering how something that felt permanent could end so quickly, but permanence without purpose is just attachment. And God is more committed to your purpose than your comfort. He is more committed to your destiny than your dependency, and He will disrupt what feels stable if it threatens what He promised. And this is where trust becomes critical, because when someone leaves suddenly you are tempted to chase, to fix, to explain, to defend, to prove. But what if chasing is disobedience? What if fixing is interference? What if explaining is unnecessary? Because when God removes, your responsibility is not to restore what He ended, your responsibility is to trust what He is preparing, and preparation often feels lonely, it often feels quiet, it often feels like you are walking without support, but isolation can be incubation, separation can be strategy, and silence can be strengthening you in ways that constant conversation never could. And the truth is, some people were comfortable with your broken version but intimidated by your healed version. Some people understood your confusion but cannot relate to your clarity. Some people bonded with your insecurity but feel threatened by your confidence. And as you grow, as you heal, as you become more aligned with who God designed you to be, misalignment becomes obvious, tension increases naturally, and what once felt easy begins to feel forced. And that forcing is a sign, that discomfort is a sign, that shift is a sign that God is rearranging your life in ways you cannot yet fully see. And you must resist the urge to hold on to what heaven is releasing, because delayed obedience creates unnecessary pain, and if you keep trying to revive what God is removing, you may delay what God is releasing next, and what He is releasing next is bigger than what you are losing now, even if you cannot see it clearly, even if you cannot feel it yet, even if your heart still aches. And remember this: sudden removal is often connected to sudden elevation. And the moment someone exits your life unexpectedly, space is created, energy is freed, focus is restored, and clarity increases, and what you do with that space determines how quickly you step into the next season, because emptiness is not meant to be filled with fear, it is meant to be filled with growth, reflection, and preparation. And instead of asking why did they leave, ask what is God making room for. Instead of asking what did I do wrong, ask what is shifting in me. Instead of assuming rejection, consider redirection. Because divine redirection rarely feels gentle at first, it feels disruptive. It feels unfair, it feels confusing, but later you look back and realize that the very person you cried over was the very obstacle standing between you and your answered prayer, and the very separation you resisted was the very protection you needed, and one day you will thank God for removing what you once begged Him to keep, and you will see clearly that what felt sudden was actually strategic. What felt painful was actually purposeful, and what felt like an ending was actually the beginning of alignment. And as this separation unfolds, you may begin to notice that your emotions fluctuate between relief and grief, because even when God removes someone for your protection, your heart still remembers the memories, your mind still replays the laughter, and your soul still feels the imprint of what once was. But do not confuse nostalgia with destiny, because just because something was meaningful does not mean it was meant to be permanent, and sometimes the very reason it felt so intense is because it was a lesson disguised as a lifetime, and when God decides that the lesson has been completed, He will not extend the contract simply because you became comfortable, because comfort can become a cage when it prevents growth. And growth is rarely convenient, it stretches you beyond familiar conversations, beyond predictable routines, beyond relationships that once defined your daily rhythm. And the suddenness of it all can make you question whether you misjudged everything, whether you missed warning signs, whether you were naive. But self-blame is not clarity, and overanalyzing is not wisdom. Because when God orchestrates removal, it is not always about wrongdoing, sometimes it is simply about expiration, and expired connections begin to decay silently. They begin to require more effort than peace, more explanation than understanding, more defense than trust. And you find yourself constantly justifying behavior that once felt natural, constantly adjusting your standards to maintain harmony, constantly shrinking to preserve attachment. And God will not allow you to shrink when He has called you to expand. He will not allow you to dim when He has called you to shine, and so He intervenes, not to hurt you but to prevent you from settling in spaces that cannot sustain your next level, because elevation demands alignment, and alignment requires pruning. And pruning never feels gentle to the branch being cut, but it is essential for greater fruit. And there are conversations that would have eventually undermined your confidence, there are influences that would have subtly redirected your focus, there are attitudes that would have slowly infected your optimism, and before those seeds could fully take root, God disrupted the connection. And you may never know the full extent of what He shielded you from, you may never see the alternative timeline that could have unfolded. But protection does not require your awareness to be effective, and sometimes the most powerful Miracles are the ones you never realize happened, the disasters that never reached you, the betrayals that never fully manifested, the setbacks that never matured because God cut them off at the source. And if you are honest, there were moments when your spirit felt restless around this person, moments when your intuition whispered caution even while your heart whispered hope, and ignoring intuition is often how we prolong lessons. But divine intervention shortens what would have been extended pain, and when the separation feels abrupt, it is often because the window of grace closed quietly, the opportunity for alignment passed unnoticed, and God refused to let misalignment continue any longer, and now you are standing in the aftermath trying to piece together what changed so quickly. But sometimes nothing changed suddenly. Sometimes the truth was developing slowly behind the surface, and heaven simply chose the moment of revelation, and revelation can feel like loss because it shatters illusions, it removes fantasies, it exposes what you were not ready to see, and illusions are comforting until they collapse, and when they collapse it feels like the ground disappeared beneath you, but what actually disappeared was false security. And false security is dangerous because it keeps you stationary when you are meant to be moving forward. And God values your future too much to let you build it on unstable foundations, and this is why certain exits happen without your permission, because if you had full control you might have delayed what was necessary, you might have negotiated with what was harmful, you might have compromised with what was incompatible. And divine love sometimes looks like divine interruption, and interruption is uncomfortable because it disrupts your expectations, but expectations are not promises. And just because you imagine someone in your future does not mean they were written into it by God, and the deeper reason this removal feels so intense is because attachments create identity. And when someone leaves it can feel like part of your identity left with them, but your identity was never meant to be anchored in a person, it was meant to be anchored in purpose, and when God recenters you He often detaches you from sources that became substitutes for Him, because sometimes we lean on people for validation, reassurance, stability, and when those people leave we are forced to confront the fact that our security must be rooted deeper than human presence, and that realization can feel lonely at first, but loneliness is not abandonment, it is refinement, it is a season where distractions decrease and clarity increases, where dependence shifts from people to purpose, and where your strength develops in silence rather than in shared conversation, and you begin to discover that you are more resilient than you thought, more capable than you assumed, more independent than you believed, and the space that once echoed with someone else's voice now becomes a space where your own inner voice grows stronger, clearer, more confident, and that growth would not have happened if the old connection remained intact. Because some relationships unintentionally limit your evolution by keeping you in familiar roles, familiar patterns, familiar emotional cycles, and when those patterns break it feels chaotic at first, but chaos often precedes clarity, and clarity reveals that what you thought was stable was actually stagnant, and stagnation is subtle because it does not always feel negative. It simply feels repetitive, predictable, unchallenging. And God did not design you for repetitive cycles that keep you circling the same emotional territory. He designed you for progress, expansion, transformation, and transformation requires endings as much as it requires beginnings. And if you look closely at your life you will notice that every major upgrade was preceded by a significant ending. Every breakthrough was preceded by a separation. Every answered prayer required the release of something that once felt essential, and this pattern is not coincidence. it is divine strategy. Because when God clears your path, He does not partially remove obstacles, He removes them completely. And sometimes the obstacle is not obvious, sometimes it looks like companionship, sometimes it looks like support, sometimes it even looks like love, but love without alignment becomes limitation, and support without shared vision becomes subtle resistance, and companionship without growth becomes dependency, and God will not allow you to depend on what cannot grow with you. And as painful as it may feel right now, there will come a day when you see the wisdom in this removal, when you recognize that what left created room for something far greater, something more aligned, something more peaceful, something that does not require you to shrink or struggle to maintain it, and you will realize that sudden does not mean random, sudden often means overdue, and overdue removals are sometimes the greatest acts of mercy, because if they had been delayed any longer you might have invested even more time, more emotion, more energy into something that was never designed to last, and the deeper truth is this: God is not taking something from you to leave you empty, He is taking something from you to leave you available, available for healthier connections, available for clearer vision, available for stronger faith, available for opportunities that require emotional freedom, and you cannot step into what is next while holding tightly to what has expired, because closed fists cannot receive new blessings. And sometimes release is the only way to receive, and while your heart may still be adjusting, your spirit already knows that this shift was necessary, that this change was inevitable, that this ending was part of a larger design, and instead of resisting it, consider embracing the possibility that what feels like sudden removal is actually divine acceleration, that what feels like heartbreak is actually heart protection, that what feels like rejection is actually redirection, and that the space left behind is not a void but a doorway, and you are standing at the threshold of a new season that requires lighter baggage, clearer boundaries, stronger discernment, and deeper trust, and the very fact that this person is no longer in your life is evidence that you are being prepared for something they could not participate in, something they could not understand, something they could not support without unintentionally slowing you down, and one day you will look back at this moment not with bitterness but with gratitude, because you will see how perfectly timed the removal was, how precisely orchestrated the separation became, and how the sudden exit marked the exact point where your life began to align with a higher plan that required courage, surrender, and faith beyond what you thought you were capable of, and that is the hidden blessing inside sudden endings. They reveal that your story is still unfolding under divine supervision. And nothing that leaves under God's authority takes your destiny with it. As you move deeper into this new season without the person who once occupied so much of your emotional space, you begin to understand that what felt like a subtraction was actually a refinement, because refinement removes impurities that you could not always identify while you were emotionally attached. And attachment can blur discernment in ways that only distance can correct, and now with distance comes perspective, and with perspective comes clarity, and with clarity comes strength that you did not know was forming quietly inside you during the very moments you felt weakest, because sometimes the greatest evidence of growth is not how strongly you hold on but how peacefully you let go. And letting go does not mean you did not care, it means you trust God more than you trust your own understanding, and trust is the foundation of every mature transformation, because when God is about to elevate you into a space that demands higher thinking, deeper discipline, and sharper discernment, He cannot allow emotional confusion to cloud your judgment, and confusion often enters through the wrong voices having consistent access to your spirit, and access is powerful, because whoever has access influences atmosphere, and atmosphere influences mindset, and mindset influences decisions, and decisions shape destiny. So when God removes someone suddenly, He is often cutting off access before that access could alter your trajectory. And what feels like an emotional shock is actually a strategic shield, and you may never fully know how different your future would have looked if that person had remained, but divine wisdom sees outcomes you cannot predict, and it intervenes before the damage becomes visible, and that is why you must resist the temptation to romanticize what ended, because memory edits reality. Memory highlights the good and softens the warning signs. Memory makes you question whether it was truly necessary, but necessity is not determined by nostalgia. It is determined by alignment, and alignment is measured by peace, growth, consistency, and shared direction, not just shared history. And shared history alone is not enough to sustain shared destiny. And this is where maturity begins to rise inside you, because you start to realize that not everyone who loves you is meant to stay with you, not everyone who understands you is meant to walk beside you forever, not everyone who once supported you is meant to stand with you in your next chapter, and that realization is not bitter, it is liberating, because it frees you from the pressure of trying to force permanence where God designed progression, and progression always requires movement, and movement requires release, and release requires faith, and faith requires surrender, and surrender is one of the most powerful acts of spiritual strength you can demonstrate. Because surrender says, I trust that what is leaving is not greater than what is coming. I trust that what feels painful now is producing something purposeful later. I trust that if God allowed this separation, He has already calculated the benefit beyond my current understanding, and as days pass and the initial shock fades, you begin to feel something unexpected, a subtle peace that replaces the chaos, a quiet confidence that replaces the anxiety, a renewed focus that replaces the distraction, and that peace is confirmation. Because when God removes someone who was misaligned, He does not replace them immediately with noise, He replaces them with clarity, and clarity allows you to see yourself more accurately, to evaluate your boundaries more honestly, to strengthen your standards more firmly, and to refine your vision more precisely. And perhaps this removal was not only about them, perhaps it was also about you becoming more aware of what you will no longer tolerate, what you will no longer chase, what you will no longer excuse. And every ending teaches something if you are willing to learn from it instead of running from it. And one of the greatest lessons sudden removal teaches is that your stability cannot depend on a single human presence, because human presence is temporary but divine direction is constant, and when your direction is anchored in something eternal, temporary exits lose their power to destroy you. They may shake you briefly, but they cannot break you permanently. And this is where you begin to step into a higher version of yourself, a version that does not panic when doors close, a version that does not beg when people withdraw, a version that does not collapse when relationships shift unexpectedly, because you have seen enough evidence to know that every closed door redirected you to something better, every unexpected ending introduced you to unexpected growth, every painful goodbye prepared you for a healthier hello, and what once felt like devastation now feels like development, and what once felt like abandonment now feels like advancement. And you begin to carry yourself differently, speak differently, think differently, because you are no longer afraid of loss in the same way you understand that anything removed by God was not meant to remain in your permanent structure, and permanent structures are built carefully, intentionally, strategically, and if someone could be removed suddenly, it means they were not foundational to your destiny, they were seasonal. And seasons change without asking permission, and when a season changes, you do not accuse the weather. You adjust your wardrobe, and in the same way, when a relationship season ends, you do not accuse your worth, you adjust your boundaries, your expectations, your environment, and you keep moving forward, because stagnation is never the answer to separation, growth is, and growth requires that you focus not on who left but on who you are becoming, and who you are becoming is stronger, wiser, more discerning, more spiritually grounded, more emotionally independent, and far more aligned with the future that is unfolding, and that future will include people who match your maturity, who respect your boundaries, who celebrate your elevation without secretly resenting it, who bring peace instead of pressure, who bring clarity instead of confusion, who bring encouragement instead of subtle competition, and those people cannot fully enter while old attachments are still occupying space. And space must be cleared before new assignments arrive, and this is why sudden removals often precede sudden blessings, because once the obstruction is gone, the flow is restored, and you may soon notice opportunities appearing, connections forming, doors opening, ideas flowing, energy increasing, because nothing is draining you anymore, nothing is dividing your focus anymore, nothing is subtly pulling you backward anymore, and you realize that what you once feared losing was actually limiting you quietly. And gratitude begins to replace grief, and understanding begins to replace anger, and trust begins to replace doubt, and you stand in this new chapter not as someone who was rejected but as someone who was redirected, not as someone who was abandoned but as someone who was advanced, not as someone who lost but as someone who was lifted, and this is the powerful truth you must hold on to. If God removed them suddenly, it is because your future required immediate action. It is because delay would have been dangerous. It is because your next level could not wait for gradual separation, and sometimes acceleration feels abrupt, but abrupt does not mean unplanned, it means urgent, and your destiny is too important for unnecessary delays. So instead of asking why did this happen to me, begin asking what is this preparing me for. Instead of replaying the ending in your mind, begin envisioning the beginning that is forming ahead, because what is ahead is not empty, it is intentional. It is not random, it is designed, and you are not walking into it alone, you are walking into it guided, guarded, and positioned for something greater than what you left behind. And one day when you look back at this moment, you will not remember it as the day someone was removed from your life, you will remember it as the day your life shifted into alignment with a higher calling, a clearer vision, a stronger identity, and a future that required courage to accept change. And you will realize that nothing God removes under His authority ever diminishes your destiny, it only protects it, refines it, and accelerates it toward the purpose that was always meant for you.